The shepherd mix had no name when the ranger found him near the edge of the Pine Creek trailhead. Just a ghost of a dog, ribs showing, paws raw, and eyes that had seen far too much. He didn't growl, didn't bark, didn't even flinch when the ranger approached with cautious steps and a rope leash. He simply lay in the frozen grass like he belonged to the mountain itself. They brought him to the Pine Creek Wildlife Recovery Station, a modest wooden structure nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering firs. Ranger Jess Thomas filled out the intake form with a sigh. "No chip, no collar, no ID," she muttered. Another ghost. The dog didn't react to the other animals, nor to the food placed near his paws. He lay still for hours, moving only to shift his weight as the cold floor numbed his legs. The volunteers named him Ghost for lack of anything else. It fit him. Silent, present, but not entirely there. No one expected him to be claimed. The roads near Pine Creek were treacherous year-round, and in winter, the only ones passing through were climbers, hunters, or people who had business with the mountain. Ghost had scars along his side and a half-healed wound on his front leg, but his eyes, those eyes, carried a weight even the most battered strays didn't wear. Ranger Jess took a picture, posted it on a regional wildlife forum, and forgot about it. But 3 days later, the front desk phone rang. A woman's voice on the other end, low and measured, asked one question. "Does he have a small nick on his right ear, just above the fold?" Claire Monroe hadn't answered her phone in weeks. It rang again just after sunrise, the sound jarring against the silence of her cabin. She stood at the kitchen sink, hands submerged in lukewarm dishwater, staring out at a frost-covered field that hadn't seen visitors in months. The trees beyond, towering and still, reflected the kind of isolation Claire had wrapped herself in since that day on the mountain. The voicemail played automatically. "Claire, it's Jess Thomas from Pine Creek Recovery. I think we may have found your dog. You should call me back." Claire's hands froze in the water. She hadn't heard Blaze's name in over a year. Not from anyone but herself, muttered quietly in dreams or on the edge of breaking down. The last time she saw him was through a blur of snow and shouting, his shape swallowed by the white just before the avalanche struck. Her resignation had come 2 days later. No press conference, no farewell dinner, just a quiet exit from the outdoor survival school she helped build from scratch. Guilt was quieter than grief, but it stayed longer. Now Claire lived alone in a rented cabin at the edge of Black Elk Ridge. She did freelance trail mapping when the weather allowed, taught self-defense to local women once a month, and spent her nights not sleeping. She called Jess back before the second voicemail finished recording. "What did you say about a dog?" she asked, her voice low and steady, but her fingers clenched the phone like it might vanish. Jess's reply was careful. "I didn't say it was Blaze, but Claire? He's got the same scar, same build, and he didn't look at anyone until we said your name." Claire didn't expect it to hurt this much. The drive to Pine Creek took 2 hours, winding roads, sheer cliffs, and a winter fog that clung to the trees like breath on glass. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel harder with each mile, knuckles pale, as if the road might decide to disappear under her tires. Jess met her outside the recovery station. No words, just a nod toward the kennels behind the main cabin. Claire followed in silence, boots crunching on the frosted ground. There he was, Kennel 6. Curled in the far corner, head down, one paw tucked under his chest. The dog didn't move when she approached. Didn't lift his head. Didn't twitch an ear. Claire crouched slowly, eyes scanning every line of his body. The scar near his right ear was there, faint but unmistakable. His build was leaner, almost skeletal, but the bone structure hadn't changed. Her breath caught in her throat. "Blaze?" she said softly, her voice cracking despite the whisper. The dog lifted his head, but his eyes, they passed over her like she was just another stranger. He blinked once, then turned away, curling tighter into himself. Claire swallowed hard. Her fingers reached through the bars, hesitated, then pulled back. Her body wanted to rush in, to hold him, to sob, but training held her still, observing, assessing. "I'm not sure," she whispered. Jess crouched beside her. "You think it's not him?" Claire shook her head, eyes fixed on the creature that looked exactly like the dog she'd loved. "I think if it is him, he doesn't know me anymore." The first night, Claire didn't sleep. She made up the guest room for him, an old quilt on the floor, a shallow bowl of water, and a thick cushion she'd once used for camping. Ghost stood in the doorway, unmoving, eyes scanning every corner like a soldier entering unfamiliar terrain. Claire didn't coax him, didn't kneel, just sat on the hallway floor, back against the wall, and waited. An hour passed before he stepped inside. He sniffed the cushion, circled it once, then lay down with his back to her. Not defiant, just distant. A presence in the room, but not with her. In the morning, she made eggs. Ghost didn't beg. He didn't come to the kitchen. But when she turned from the stove, she saw him lying in the hallway, facing her now, watching, quiet. She opened the back door to let in fresh air. As always, she tapped the frame 3 times before opening it fully, a habit Blaze had picked up and mirrored years ago. She did it out of instinct, but as the 3rd tap echoed, Ghost's head snapped around. He stood, ears perked. Claire froze. He walked to the door slowly, looked up at her, then checked the perimeter of the porch 1, 2, 3 spots, exactly as Blaze used to do. That afternoon, she found him by the fireplace. Not curled up, not relaxed, just lying parallel to the hearth, facing the room, eyes half-lidded but alert. The position was textbook Blaze, how he used to nap while guarding the cabin during training camps. Claire sank to the floor across from him. "He's in there," she whispered. "I know he is." But something's keeping him locked away. Ghost didn't move, but his tail gave one slow, uncertain thump against the rug. The letter came in a manila envelope. Handwritten, no return address, just Claire's name, scrawled in pencil across the front. She found it wedged in her mailbox between utility bills and an outdated fishing supply catalog. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper, lined and slightly wrinkled. Crayon drawings covered the bottom third. Mountains, a dog with upright ears, a stick figure with long braids. The handwriting was uneven, printed in block letters. "Hi, my name is Lena. Your dog used to live with us last winter. We called him Storm Runner. He saved my grandfather when he fell in the snow. He stayed with him all night and barked until someone came. My mom says he was probably a rescue dog before. He sleeps next to my tent and lets the little ones hold his paw when they cry." Claire read it 3 times. The envelope also held a photo, grainy, taken from an old phone, but clear enough. There was Ghost, blazing in the snow beside an elderly man wrapped in wool blankets. The setting looked remote, tree-line thin like a high ridge. Claire's hands trembled as she flipped the photo over. In a child's handwriting, "Please tell him we miss him. We hope he is okay. He is a good dog. Love, Lena." Ghost lay nearby on the cabin floor, chin resting on his paws. Claire watched him, her heart pressing hard against her ribs. "Is this where you've been?" she whispered. "Is this why you left?" Claire sat in silence, the letter trembling in her hand. She wasn't ready to let him go again, not without seeing the place that had claimed a piece of his soul. Ghost didn't look at her, but his ears twitched, his eyes stayed open, and his tail again moved once, slow and heavy, against the wood floor. It took Claire 4 hours and a set of vague directions scrawled in the margins of Lena's letter to find the ridge. The road turned to gravel, then dirt, then disappeared entirely. She parked the Jeep beside a fallen log and hiked the last 2 miles on foot, boots sinking into late spring snowmelt, shoulders tight with anticipation. The village was smaller than she expected, just a cluster of tents and cabins nestled between wind-bent pines. Smoke curled from a single chimney. A group of children played by a stream, their laughter echoing through the trees. And there, just beyond them, stood Blaze. He was perched on a rock, eyes tracking the children like a sentinel. When Claire stepped into the clearing, he looked straight at her, but didn't move. A woman in her 40s approached, her braided hair streaked with gray, hands worn from weather and work. "You must be Claire," she said. "Lena said you might come." Claire nodded, unable to speak. The woman glanced toward Blaze. We call him Storm Runner here. He came after the first blizzard last year. Just walked into camp one morning and never left. Claire watched him. He hadn't taken his eyes off her. He protects the children, the woman continued. Warns us about storms. Even pulled one of our elders from a collapsed trail 2 months ago. No leash, no command. He just knows. Claire's voice came out hoarse. He was trained for that. It's what we did together. The woman smiled gently. Then he's still doing it, just with us now. Blaze didn't run to her, didn't whine. He stayed on his rock, still and watching. But his tail lifted slightly, just once, before settling again in the dust. Claire stayed until sundown. She sat beneath a crooked pine, watching Blaze move through the camp like he'd been born there. He nudged a toddler back toward her tent when she wandered too far, barked twice at a rustle in the trees, drank slowly from the stream, then lay near the fire pit, front paws crossed like royalty. Not once did he come to her. The children adored him, called him by name, draped arms over his back without hesitation. One boy kissed his muzzle before running off to chase a sibling. Blaze didn't flinch. Claire felt something crack inside her. This dog had once slept curled against her legs after long nights on ice, had pulled her from a crevasse when her harness snapped, had learned her moods so intimately he would nudge her hand before she realized she was unraveling. And now, he belonged to someone else. She rose slowly, brushing pine needles from her coat. Blaze watched the movement, but didn't get up. His eyes followed her as she crossed the clearing, her boots sinking softly into the loam. At the edge of the camp, Claire turned. "If you're happy," she whispered, "I won't ask you to leave." The wind moved through the trees like breath. Blaze stood finally. He didn't approach, didn't bark, but he watched her go with the stillness of something ancient. And just before she disappeared around the bend, his tail lifted once, high and strong, then dropped again like a flag at half-mast. 2 nights later, Claire returned to the ridge. She didn't tell anyone. Just packed a small bag, laced up her boots, and followed the same trail back up through the woods. She wasn't ready to let go, not completely. Halfway there, the fog rolled in. Dense, silver gray, swallowing the path in seconds. Claire slowed, compass in hand, but even that spun oddly in the mountain magnetics. The trees closed in, unfamiliar now, wrong. She turned twice, then again. Panic thudded against her ribs. Then she heard it. A low bark, short and sharp. Ahead, just beyond a split tree. "Blaze?" she called out. Another bark, closer. Footsteps. Not hers. And then he appeared. Silent, solid, tail high, eyes locked on hers. No hesitation. He trotted up, bumped her leg with his shoulder, then turned around and started walking. Claire followed. He led her without looking back, weaving through rocks, around thick tree trunks, always pausing just enough for her to catch up. In 15 minutes, the fog broke, and there was the camp. Firelight flickering between trees. Blaze stopped at the edge of the clearing. Claire crouched beside him, breath catching. "You still know how to find me?" she whispered. Blaze didn't answer. But when she placed her hand on his back, he didn't move away. He sat down beside her close enough that their shoulders touched. And together, they watched the mist slip back into the trees. The next morning, Claire sat with Lena and the elder woman, Mara, in a circle of sun-warmed stones. They didn't speak much. Mara stirred tea made from pine needles. Lena traced patterns in the dirt with a stick. Blaze lay between them, dozing lightly, ears still twitching with every shift in wind. Clara cleared her throat. "I don't want to take him away," she said, "but I don't want to lose him again, either." Mara nodded, watching the steam curl from her cup. "You're both his people," she said simply. "Maybe he's meant to walk both paths." Claire looked at Blaze. His breath steady, body calm, but not quite relaxed. Always ready, always listening. Lena spoke up, her voice soft but certain. "He can come visit. Maybe even teach the little ones how to listen like he does." Claire smiled, but there was weight in it. That would mean the world. She reached into her pack and pulled out Blaze's old collar. It was worn, leather cracked at the edges, but the engraved tag still caught the sun. "Blaze, if found, he's already home." She handed it to Lena. "Maybe you can make him something new." something that says both names. Lena took it with reverence, her small fingers tracing the letters. Blaze didn't open his eyes, but his tail thumped once on the ground. Not loud, just enough. He'd heard every word. Claire didn't move back to the city. Instead, she rented a cabin closer to the ridge, less than an hour's hike from the camp. She started teaching weekend survival classes for girls from nearby towns, often inviting Mara and Lena to speak. Sometimes the girls would hike up to the village and learn how to build fires from scratch. Sometimes Blaze would be waiting for them at the trailhead, tail high. He never stayed long. A few nights a month he'd come to Claire's cabin. No barking, no fanfare, just a soft knock of paws on the porch. She'd open the door, and there he'd be, calm, alert, eyes the same golden brown she knew from the glaciers. He never stayed more than a night, but that was enough. Claire kept the old collar on her bookshelf next to a picture of Blaze in his rescue vest, but on the hook by the door she hung the new one Lena had made. Braided rawhide, 2 tags jingling, side by side. Storm Runner and Blaze. One evening, as the fire crackled low, Claire watched him sleeping by the hearth. Same position as always, chest facing the door, ears twitching in half-dream. "You don't have to choose," she whispered. "You never did." He didn't stir, but the rhythm of his breathing, steady, deep, peaceful, told her he understood. And maybe, for the first time since that avalanche, they were both exactly where they were meant to be. Years passed, the trail wore deeper, with footsteps, young and old, following where Blaze once led. His visits to Claire's cabin grew fewer, his steps slower, but his eyes remained sharp, his spirit unchanged. He passed on a quiet spring morning. No storm, no sound, just sunlight filtering through pine needles and the smell of thawing earth. They found him lying by the stream where he'd first appeared years ago. Head resting on a flat stone, body curled like he was only sleeping. Lena wept. Mara stood still, then knelt and whispered something no one could hear. Claire came that night. She didn't speak. She just sat by the stream until the stars rose, one by one, above the ridge. Months later, the village built a stone marker on that same spot. A bronze sculpture sat atop it. Simple, life-size, perfectly still. Blaze, head lifted, eyes forward, one paw slightly raised like he was ready to move. On the plaque beneath, the words were carved in both English and the local tribal tongue. He never needed a leash to lead us. He never needed words to teach us. Blaze, Storm Runner, guardian of the ridge. Children still place pine cones at his feet. Hikers pause to touch the cold metal nose. And on certain misty mornings, they say you can hear footsteps in the woods. Steady, measured, just ahead on the trail. And every spring, when the snow begins to melt and the first wildflowers bloom near the ridge, the children say he comes back in the wind, guiding them. Still, the air inside the Maple Hollow Animal Shelter pressed against Lena Whitaker like a coat she couldn't shrug off. Too tight, too cold, and heavy with something she didn't want to name. She hovered near the entrance, her fingers still curled around the door handle, as if letting go would commit her to being there. Her grandfather, Samuel Whitaker, gave her a gentle nod. He didn't say much. He rarely did these days, but his presence, steady and quiet, filled the space between them. This wasn't meant to be anything more than a distraction, a Saturday afternoon errand, a maybe. But Lena wasn't fooled. He had hoped, maybe even prayed, that a visit to the shelter might crack something open in her, something locked since the accident, since the day her world became a house with one less light on. The corridor stretched ahead, lined with chain-link kennels and echoes of barking. The scent of wet fur and disinfectant lingered like a memory. Lena walked slowly, her arms folded tight across her chest, her gaze fixed somewhere between the floor and nothing at all. Then something made her stop. Kennel 7 sat tucked at the far end of the hall, and inside, in the shadows, was a dog that didn't bark, didn't whine, didn't even stand. A German Shepherd mix, gray around the muzzle, still in a world that wouldn't quiet down. Lena stared, and for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like someone else understood. He wasn't like the others. Where most of the dogs barked, jumped, or scratched against the metal, this one simply sat, his body curled in the corner of the kennel as if trying to disappear into the shadows. One of his eyes was cloudy, rimmed with the blur of age. The other was sharp, watchful, but not afraid. Lena moved closer without thinking. The dog didn't stir, not a twitch of an ear, not a shift in posture. He just watched her approach, his gaze steady and unblinking, as if he'd been waiting a long time for something, or someone, that never came. A voice interrupted the stillness. "That one's been here a while," said a staff member walking past with a leash looped around her wrist. She paused and gave a small nod toward the kennel. "He doesn't make much noise, doesn't answer to his name either, if he ever had one." Lena didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the tarnished brass tag that hung from the dog's collar, dulled with age and wear. She crouched down, close enough to read it. "If you're reading this, I was loved once." The words hit with quiet force. "He showed up after the first frost," the woman added. "No chip, no records, just that tag. We call him Ranger, but he never comes when you call, just sort of watches." Rayunga. The name didn't land heavy or bright, it just settled, like it had always belonged to him, whether he cared to wear it or not. Lena sat on her heels, her arms wrapped around her knees. She didn't look at Samuel. She didn't speak. She and Ranger just stared at each other, two beings stitched with silence. And somewhere in the stillness, something shifted. Samuel adopted Ranger without hesitation. There wasn't a long discussion or a list of pros and cons. He saw the way Lena had sat in front of that kennel, quiet, still, but more present than she'd been in weeks. And he understood. Some choices didn't need to be spoken to be made. Ranger didn't race through the front door like dogs do in stories. He didn't sniff every corner or chase imaginary intruders from beneath the couch. He walked in slowly, his nails tapping softly against the hardwood, his body moving like someone returning to a place they might have known in another life. Lena stood off to the side, her backpack still slung over one shoulder. She watched as Ranger took a quiet lap around the living room, stopping briefly to glance at the fireplace, the bay window, and the faded rug beneath the coffee table. Then, without fanfare, he lowered himself onto the floor beside her grandfather's old armchair and sighed. Low, deep, and full of something Lena couldn't name. Samuel carried in the last of the paperwork and a small bag of supplies from the shelter. "Guess he's making himself at home," he said gently. Lena nodded but didn't answer. That night, for the first time in months, there were 2 bowls on the kitchen floor, one for Ranger, one for water. She didn't ask, she just placed it next to where he lay and returned to the couch. And they didn't watch TV, not really. The screen flickered in the dark, but Lena's eyes stayed on Ranger and his stayed closed, breathing slow, steady. Later, when the house was quiet and the night was folded around the windows, Lena curled up on the rug beside him. Her fingers brushed against his fur. "I don't want to forget them," she whispered, barely louder than breath. "But remembering hurts." Ranger didn't move. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. And for the first time since the accident, Lena slept through the night. Not alone. Mornings came softer after Ranger arrived. There was no barking, no frantic tail wagging, no chaos. Just the sound of his paws padding quietly across the floor and the soft rustle as he sat near the door, waiting. Lena would wake to find him there, still and patient, his eyes lifting when hers finally opened, as if to say, "You're not alone anymore." They didn't need alarm clocks, they didn't need words. Coffee for Samuel, water for Ranger, silence for Lena. Gentle, not heavy, the kind that makes room for breathing. Each day, Lena grew a little more present. She didn't smile yet, not quite, but her steps lost some of their weight. She stayed downstairs longer, sat near the fireplace longer, and sometimes when Samuel spoke to her, she answered with more than just a nod. One afternoon, Samuel found her sitting at the kitchen table with a pencil in her hand and a sheet of paper in front of her. She was drawing. At first, it was simple, a rough sketch of Ranger's paw print by the back door. Then came the curve of his tail, curled against the rug, the way sunlight caught on the silver in his fur during naps. She didn't show her sketches to anyone. She didn't need to. They weren't for praise. They were proof of stillness, of safety, of small moments stitched back together. In the quiet, Lena wasn't just existing anymore. She was beginning to return. It started with small steps, lingering longer on the front porch, asking Samuel if they could walk a little farther each afternoon. Ranger always came along, steady and silent, like a shadow that had chosen to stay. And then, one day, on a path winding through Maple Hollow Park, they saw him. A boy, alone, curled into himself on a splintered bench, knees tight to his chest, hoodie pulled low. A light breeze moved the leaves around him, but he didn't seem to notice. He just sat there, small and still, like someone trying to disappear into the seams of the world. Lena recognized him not by name, but by silence. His was the kind you didn't grow into, but fell into. Sudden, deep, heavy. She and Ranger had been walking the path through Maple Hollow Park, just as they did most afternoons. Samuel trailed a few steps behind, giving Lena the space she still needed. When they passed the boy, Ranger slowed. He didn't pull or bark or wag his tail. He simply paused. His ears flicked, and his eyes fixed softly on the boy. Then, without waiting for a command, he veered off the path and made his way toward the bench. Lena let the leash loosen in her hand, unsure but trusting. Ranger stopped a few feet away and lay down, chin on his paws, still and unthreatening. For a long time, the boy didn't move. Then, just a flicker of his eyes toward the dog, then again, and again. And slowly, as if remembering how to reach outward, the boy extended a hand. His fingers brushed the top of Ranger's back. Ranger didn't flinch, didn't move, just let the moment settle like dust in sunlight. Lena stood frozen. It was the first time she'd seen someone else connect with Ranger, and in that moment she realized he didn't just wait for her. He waited for anyone who needed a reason to stay. That night, Lena whispered to Samuel, "He knows how to wait for people." Samuel didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The library still smelled like old paper and cinnamon, the kind of scent that lingered in the corners of childhood and made silence feel less lonely. When Marla, the town librarian, called, Samuel wasn't sure at first. She heard about Ranger, he explained to Lena one evening. From someone at the park. She runs a reading program for kids who are struggling. Said they could use a dog who listens. Lena didn't respond right away. Her eyes stayed on Ranger, who lay curled beside the fireplace, his chest rising and falling like waves against the shore. "She wants him?" Lena finally asked, softly. "She wants what he brings," Samuel replied. "Calm, stillness, the kind that doesn't ask for anything in return." So, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, Lena and Ranger found themselves in the children's corner of the Maple Hollow Public Library. The room was small, filled with beanbags and faded rugs and shelves of worn-out storybooks. A girl sat in the far corner, clutching a copy of Charlotte's Web. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the first page. Ranger lay down at her feet, perfectly still. No bark, no twitch, just presence. The girl began to read, her voice so faint it was almost air. She stumbled over the first sentence, paused, tried again. Ranger blinked, slow and steady. The girl's breath caught and then eased. Halfway through the chapter, she reached down, without looking, and rested her hand on his back. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. Lena watched from across the room, her sketchbook open in her lap. She didn't draw the girl or the book or the dog. She drew the space between them, the invisible thread, the healing. It happened on a rainy evening, the kind where the sky never really turned dark, just dimmed into a soft, endless gray. Lena sat curled in her usual spot on the floor, her fingers absent-mindedly brushing through Ranger's fur as he slept beside her. She found herself toying with the brass tag on his collar. It was warm from his body, scratched and worn smooth by time. She'd read the inscription a dozen times. If you're reading this, I was loved once. But tonight, her thumb caught on something new. She turned it over, tilted it under the lamplight. There, barely visible beneath years of wear, were faint engravings. A few letters, a street name maybe, part of a zip code. Her heart caught. "Grandpa?" she called softly. Samuel looked up from his crossword puzzle. She held out the tag. "I think. There's more." They spent the next hour at the kitchen table, piecing together what they could. Samuel fetched a magnifying glass, and Lena traced the barely there grooves with the tip of a pencil. It wasn't much, but it was enough to guess. An address, or at least the remnant of one. Samuel placed a blank envelope in front of her. "You want to write?" Lena hesitated. What if someone was still looking? What if Ranger belonged to another life? What if she lost him? But she thought of that little girl at the library, of Jaden in the park, of herself not so long ago. With trembling hands, Lena began to write. "Dear Sir or Madam, I think I may have your dog. He's been with me for a while now, and he's changed my life." She paused, then added, "But if he's yours, I'll understand, even if it breaks my heart." The letter arrived 10 days later. The envelope was cream-colored, the handwriting careful and old-fashioned. Loops and curls that suggested patience and trembling hands. Lena opened it with Samuel at her side, her pulse quick and shallow. "Dear Miss Whitaker, if your dog wears the tag I once fastened to the collar of a shaggy old shepherd, then I believe you've found Charlie. He was the therapy dog of my granddaughter Emma. He disappeared after the storm last spring. We searched for weeks. I didn't think I'd ever see him again. If you're willing, we'd love to meet you. Sincerely, Joseph Caldwell, Ellensburg." Lena read the letter twice before folding it carefully into her lap. "He has a family," she said quietly. Samuel's voice was low. "Maybe more than one now." They drove to Ellensburg on a Saturday morning, the sky blanketed in quiet gray. Lena packed her sketchbook and Ranger's blanket. Ranger sat in the back seat, looking out the window, calm as ever. The Caldwell house was small, worn with time, surrounded by cottonwood still bare from winter. A wind chime tinkled faintly on the porch. Joseph opened the door slowly, leaning on a wooden cane. His hair was white, his shoulders curved, but his eyes were clear. He didn't look at Lena. He looked at Ranger. "Charlie," he breathed. Ranger stepped out of the car, one slow paw at a time, and walked to the porch without hesitation. He stood in front of Joseph for a heartbeat. Then he leaned forward and gently pressed his head into the man's chest. Joseph dropped to his knees, his cane forgotten on the porch. His hands found Ranger's neck, his fur, and then his face. "I thought you were gone," he whispered. A girl appeared behind him, slightly older than Lena, with auburn hair and wide, tear-gilled eyes. "Emma," Joseph said, his voice breaking. "He came back." Emma fell to her knees beside Ranger, wrapping her arms around him in one long, aching hug. Leah stood beside Samuel, her throat too tight for words. She hadn't prepared for what this might feel like, but it felt right. They didn't talk much that afternoon. Lena sat beside Emma on the porch steps, while Joseph and Samuel shared coffee in the quiet. Ranger rested between the two girls, his head on his paws. Eyes half closed like he was finally at peace. Emma showed Lena an old drawing, creased at the edges. "I drew him when I was little," she said. "He used to sit with me when I was scared." Lena nodded. "Me too." They smiled, small quiet things born from understanding. As the sky began to shift into evening, Lena stood and walked to the porch railing. She reached into her coat pocket and took out Ranger's worn brass tag. For a moment, she turned it in her fingers, letting the fading sunlight catch the words one last time. "If you're reading this, I was loved once." Then, with careful fingers, she looped it onto a rusted nail by the porch post and stepped back. "I think it belongs here," she said. Emma stood beside her. "So does he. But he always finds a way back to the people who need him." They didn't say goodbye. There wasn't a need. Some bonds didn't end. They shifted, stretched, became something larger than possession. Ranger didn't belong to one home anymore. He belonged to every place he had helped someone breathe again. On the drive home, Lena opened her sketchbook. In the fading light, she added one more drawing. Just a porch, a chime, and a dog in the doorway. And in the corner, beneath it all, she wrote the same 3 words that had changed everything. He came back.